This story isn't about me exactly. It happened to my Uncle Joseph back in the late 1970s. He was only around 19 at the time, living in a small town called Brookhaven, just across the Texas border. One Friday evening, he decided to go see a movie by himself. He didn't really have plans, and back then going out alone wasn't seen as weird. So he got dressed, grabbed a few bucks, and walked down to this old theater on Main Street. It was the kind of place with sticky floors and seats that squeaked if you leaned too far back. Still, it had a certain charm. He bought his ticket, grabbed a soda, and sat down about halfway up in the middle row. The theater wasn't very full, just a few people scattered here and there. Halfway through the movie, for some reason, he turned his head to the right. That's when he saw her. She was sitting about 2 seats away, young, maybe his age, with long, wavy hair that looked almost too perfect. She was wearing a pale blue dress and didn't seem like she belonged in that theater, or even that decade. They made eye contact, and she gave him a small smile. Then, without saying a word, she stood up and moved to sit right next to him. They didn't talk right away. Instead, she slowly reached out and took his hand. Uncle Joseph said it didn't feel like a normal hand. It was cold, not just cool like someone who'd been out in the wind, but cold like she'd been sitting in a freezer. Still, he didn't pull away. Something about her kept him there. He said it felt like he was under some kind of spell. They ended up kissing right there in the theater, which was way out of character for him. And while it felt good at first, he couldn't stop thinking about how freezing she was. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, thinking maybe that would help. After the movie ended, they stood outside for a few minutes talking. She said she was heading across the street to a bar called Miller's Tap and asked if he wanted to come. He agreed, but just as they were about to go, she said she needed to use the restroom. Before walking away, she handed him back his jacket and something else. A small silver ring. "I want you to have this," she said, then added, "I don't really have a home right now." He was confused but nodded and waited by the restroom door like she asked. 5 minutes passed, then 10. He watched every woman who walked out, but she wasn't one of them. He started to feel uneasy. Eventually, he asked one of the workers if someone could check the restroom. They did. It was empty. Uncle Joseph was shocked. He even got the manager to look, but the woman was simply gone. That's when he remembered. She said she worked at the bar they were supposed to go to, so thinking maybe she slipped past him somehow, he headed over to Miller's Tap. He lit a cigarette outside, thinking maybe she'd show up, then went in and asked the bartender if a girl matching her description worked there. The bartender shook his head but said he'd ask the owner. A few minutes later, this older man came out and asked him to describe her again. Uncle Joseph did his best. The blue dress, long dark hair, pale skin, cold hands. As he spoke, the owner's face changed, his eyebrows lowered and his smile disappeared. Then Joseph pulled out the silver ring. The owner stared at it like he'd seen a ghost. "That can't be," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" my uncle asked. The man looked him dead in the eyes and said, "That girl, you just described her exactly. But she's been dead for over a year. She was found in an alley not far from here. Murdered." My uncle didn't know what to say. He stumbled out of the bar and went straight home. He still has that ring. It's tucked away in a little box in his drawer and he refuses to throw it out. He told me once that sometimes he tries to convince himself the owner was mistaken. Maybe it was just a girl who looked like the one who died. But then he remembers her cold skin, the way she disappeared, and how the ring made the owner go pale, like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. He said the whole thing still bothers him, not just because it was creepy, but because for a little while it felt real, like he was meant to meet her, like she needed him for something. And honestly, every time I visit my uncle and he pulls out that little silver ring to show me, I get the chills. Because deep down I think he's telling the truth. Whatever or whoever that girl was, she wasn't just some stranger in a movie theater. She wasn't alive. Not really. And maybe she never had been. Hey, my name's Zoe. I live in Georgia now, but what I'm about to tell you happened years ago when I was a little kid living with my family in a small town called Dry Creek. I've always liked scary stuff. Ghost stories, creepy shows, anything like that. I guess it makes sense though, because something really strange and scary happened to me when I was young. And once you experience something like that, it kind of sticks with you. Most of my early childhood is fuzzy, like a dream I can barely remember. But there's one memory that's always stayed crystal clear, like it was carved into my brain. I was about 2 years old, maybe a little younger, and my family was going through a rough patch. My parents had just moved to the US from Ghana, and we didn't have much money. For a while, we lived in the basement of a house that belonged to some older man we barely knew. The basement was dark and cold, with cement floors and walls that always felt a little wet. There was only one tiny window up near the ceiling, and even during the day, barely any light came in. All we had in that space was an old mattress, 2 cabinets shoved into the corner, and a few chairs that looked like they'd been pulled from a junkyard. My parents slept on the floor, and my big brother and I shared the mattress. At night, it was pitch black down there. I remember my mom humming lullabies to help us sleep, and my dad would tuck the thin blanket around us real tight. I always felt safe while they were awake. But once the lights went out and the room went quiet, things changed. Almost every night I'd wake up sometime after midnight. It would be so silent. I could hear the sound of the pipes creaking in the walls, and that's when I'd see them. The hands. They were big, pale hands, almost glowing in the dark like they were painted white. They reached out from underneath one of the cabinets across the room. Slowly, carefully, like they didn't want to wake anyone. The fingers moved in strange ways, curling and twisting like they were drawing invisible shapes in the air, or signaling something I couldn't understand. Sometimes they waved like they were trying to get my attention. Sometimes they would just hover. And the worst part? There was never a body. No arms, no face. Just 2 white hands slipping out from the shadows, reaching. I remember staring at them, frozen, my little heart pounding. I never screamed. I don't think I could. I'd try to reach out just a little to see if I could touch them. I don't know why. Maybe I thought they were part of a dream. Maybe I just didn't understand how wrong it all was. But every time, right before I got close, my mom would turn over and pull me back toward her. She'd wrap her arm around me and hum that same lullaby, and then the hands would vanish, like they were never there. This happened again and again. I never told anyone. I thought it was just something weird my brain made up because I was a kid. Eventually, we moved out of that basement and into a real apartment. The memories of the hands faded, tucked away in the back of my mind like a dusty, old book I never opened. But then years later, when I was 14, everything came rushing back. My brother and I were sitting on the porch one summer night, talking about old times. We were laughing about how tiny that basement was and how we had to share one blanket in the winter. Then, out of nowhere, he got quiet and said, "Hey Zoe, did you ever see those hands?" I stared at him. "What hands?" He looked at me, like he wasn't sure if he should say more. "The white hands. They used to come out from under the cabinet at night." My mouth went dry. I could barely breathe. I hadn't told anyone about the hands, not ever, but he saw them too. We both sat there frozen, remembering. We started sharing the details, how the hands moved, how they looked, how they never made a sound. We both remembered the exact same thing. No face. Nobody. Just those pale hands reaching out from the shadows like they wanted to grab us. That's when I knew it wasn't a dream. It wasn't something my imagination made up. It was real. Later that year, I started digging around online. I read stories and watched videos about haunted houses and childhood hauntings. That's when I found out we weren't alone. A lot of people, kids especially, have seen similar things, not ghosts, not monsters, just hands. Some said the hands tried to play. Others said they reached for them just like they did with me. Some believed they were spirits stuck between worlds. Others thought they were something worse, things that feed on fear, showing up only to the smallest and most helpless. I still don't know what they were. I've never seen them again, and honestly, I hope I never do. But even now, all these years later, when the room goes dark and quiet, I sometimes think I see something move in the corner of my eye. Something low, to the ground. Something slow and pale, and every time my heart skips a beat. I'll never forget what happened during my first year at Eastwood College. It was the morning after Halloween, November 1st, and something about that day still messes with my head. I don't talk about it much because, honestly, I'm not sure anyone would believe me. That morning started out pretty normal, just rushed. I overslept and had a chemistry lab at 8:30 a.m. I remember waking up in a panic, throwing on whatever clothes I could find, and stumbling around our tiny dorm room. My roommate, Sean, groaned and pulled the blanket over his head while I kept bumping into stuff and making way too much noise. There were no buses running at that hour, so I had to walk to class. It usually took about 15 minutes from the dorm to the science building. It was chilly outside, that kind of damp cold that seeps into your clothes. The sky was gray, and everything looked kind of washed out. The streets were unusually empty. I figured most students were still sleeping off Halloween parties from the night before. Even the squirrels were quiet. As I got halfway up Juniper Hill, I noticed something strange. At the top of the hill, near the old fountain, was a man in a long black robe. He was tall, like really tall, and he wore a ghost face mask, the kind from the Scream movies. He just stood there totally still, looking down at a man sleeping on a bench. That man, I'd seen him before. He was homeless and often slept in that spot wrapped up in a heavy blue blanket. At first, I thought it was just someone playing a prank, still goofing off after Halloween. But something about the way the masked guy stood there made my skin crawl. He wasn't moving, not even a little. No shifting, no adjusting his hood, just frozen like a statue, watching the sleeping man like he was studying him. I tried to ignore it. I was already running late and I didn't want to get locked out of the lab. But as I walked past, I felt this weird pressure in my chest, like something was watching me too closely. I looked over, and yep, the guy in the mask turned his head and stared straight at me. He didn't say anything, just stared. I sped up a little, pretending not to care, but I couldn't help glancing back. He was still standing there, still watching me. The farther I got, the more that cold, creepy feeling wrapped around me, like invisible fingers brushing my neck. I told myself to keep walking, just get to campus, get inside. But then something made me stop in my tracks. I turned around one more time. The bench was empty. The homeless man, gone. The guy in the mask, also gone. I stood there blinking for a second, totally confused. There was no way they could have just disappeared like that. There weren't any alleys nearby. No cars passed, no sound at all. Just an empty sidewalk and that weird feeling in my stomach that something was very, very wrong. I didn't wait around. I ran the rest of the way to the science building, heart pounding in my ears. I don't even remember the lab that day. All I could think about was how those two people vanished, how fast it happened, and how that masked guy stared at me like he knew me. For a while, I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe the homeless man just woke up and left. Maybe the guy in the costume was just messing with people and ducked behind a tree or something. But here's where it gets weirder. That bench, the one where the man always slept, he never came back. Every morning after that, I passed the same spot on my way to class. And every morning, the bench was empty. For weeks, then months. I asked around, quietly, just to see if anyone else had noticed. A girl in my biology class, Nina, said she heard campus security pick the guy up for causing a disturbance. Another student said he'd gotten into some kind of trouble and was banned from the area, but that didn't make sense. That man had been there almost every morning, curled up with his blanket minding his own business. He never bothered anyone. And even if he had been picked up by the cops, wouldn't he have come back eventually? or at least left some of his stuff behind. I went by the bench once late at night just to check it out. The air was heavy, like it was holding its breath. The streetlights flickered and the wind whispered through the trees like it was trying to say something I couldn't quite hear. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. There's something about that moment, when both the man and the masked figure vanished, that I can't explain. And it's not just the disappearing act. It's the feeling I got when the guy in the ghost face mask looked at me. It wasn't playful. It wasn't funny. It felt personal. Like he knew who I was. Like he'd been waiting for me. Ever since then, I can't enjoy Halloween the way I used to. The decorations, the costumes, the jump scares. They all feel a little too real now. Sometimes when I walk alone, I still get that cold feeling crawling up my back. And every once in a while when I pass that empty bench.